Hello, my name is Dr. Katie Richards. I'm a lecturer at the School of Law and Politics at Cardiff University, and I'm also a member of the Centre for Law and Society here at Cardiff. Now, one of the things that we've been asked to do as part of the centre is to talk about how we're continuing legal scholarship during lockdown. Now, I have to say, my research did not get off to a very good start in lockdown. I found it quite difficult to adapt to the working from home environment and also missing colleagues, those kind of formal opportunities to present work, but also the kind of corridor chats that kind of spark inspiration for me. However, I am happy to say that in the last few weeks I have got back into some sort of daily writing and research routine following the excellent Dr. Melanie Smith's Academic Coach programme, which I can definitely recommend if you are struggling for inspiration or dealing with procrastination during lockdown. So what have I been doing to continue my legal scholarship? Well, most of my work deals with kind of commercial law, so I look at insurance law and international trade finance. And at the moment I'm looking at something quite topical, which doesn't often happen in insurance law, and that is the kind of ability for businesses to make claims on business interruption policies as a result of coronavirus. Now, business interruption policies cover businesses for loss of profits which follow some sort of physical damage at their premises. So, for example, if a business suffers a fire, they will make a claim on their property insurance to have the shop or the business reinstated, but they will also make a claim on the BI, the business interruption part of their policy, to reclaim the loss of profits for that period. Now, there has been lots of talk about whether business interruption policies will respond in the same way as a result of lost profits during coronavirus. The kind of initial problem is that the kind of loss caused by coronavirus doesn't kind of immediately present as physical damage in the same way that loss by a fire would. People are closed down because, frankly, governments told them to, not because there has been particular damage at their premises. So that's difficult. Although there is a line of case law in the UK, so there's the Ordula, the Teoxide and CGU cases, where there's this idea that kind of temporary or surface contamination, such as a spill of hydrochloric acid or the temporary discoloration of UPVC materials, can constitute physical damage for the purposes of making a claim under a BI policy. So, if you could prove that there was an outbreak of corona at your premises, you might be able to make a claim following that line of case law. But even if you could kind of amass the requisite proof, and that is likely to be difficult, it is not going to be great. And that's because the indemnity that you'll get will only cover you, according to that line of case law, for the period of the cleanup. So much a shorter period than the whole loss of profit caused by corona. You might also be able to make a claim under extensions to cover, so these are kind of add-ons to cover as a result of denial of access or because there has been an outbreak of a notifiable human disease, if you have added those to your policy. The problem with that as a line of argument is that research by the Financial Conduct Authority and the Association of British Insurers has suggested that lots of businesses haven't bought these add-ons. And again, even if you have bought the add-on, these are likely to be subject to smaller sub-limits, and so ultimately you are unlikely to get the whole indemnity. So the whole period is not likely to be covered, or you will not get all of your lost profits for that relevant period. So that's not great. So in this paper, I'm proposing to look at both the kind of short-term measures that the government have introduced, so the package of financial measures, grants and loans according to the value of the business. And while I think there are probably issues with those, that is certainly a better response than to do what is being proposed in some US states, which is to retrospectively interpret the insurance policy to find cover in the coronavirus context. I don't think that's very good from the sense of freedom of contract or in terms of the reserves that insurers have built up through premium income. So longer term, what might the solution be? It's certainly clear, I think, that the risk of a pandemic occurring again in the future is quite high, and that's simply because of how connected the world is now. The way we travel, the way we move around to work, for holidays, etc., creates the conditions in which viruses can spread easily. And so I think as businesses, we need to be alive to the risk of pandemic losses and to insure against them. Now, in this paper, I will be suggesting that I do think insurance is the appropriate mechanism for this. And there's a few reasons for that. Firstly, they have the infrastructure and the expertise in risk management. So they know how to collect and redistribute funds. They have expertise in pricing according to risk. And also the mechanism of insurance has the ability to encourage pro-social behaviour. And by that I mean behaviour which actively works to reduce the risk of the loss occurring and is beneficial for society more broadly. So there is a really kind of strong case for insurance as a mechanism. And we also know that there was pandemic policies available in the market before the outbreak of corona. So Wimbledon tennis championships had a policy and are likely to recover in excess of £100 million as a result of their claim. So is it simply then that the private market should provide cover? Well, I'm going to suggest that the answer is no. The reason for that is because if everybody suddenly bought policies and then there was a pandemic, there would be lots and lots of claims within a really short period, and this would just be very, very difficult for insurers. This is the aggregated nature of loss, as Professor Dan Schwartz describes it, or in the OECD book on systemic risk, they call it scale effects. And basically that is that the mechanism couldn't cope because everybody would be making a claim at the same time. So I think insurance is the mechanism, but the market is not sufficient on its own. And so I think one solution at least is a government-backed scheme that works alongside the private insurance market. And in the UK context, we already have an example of this working quite well. So that's Flood Re, a flood insurance programme for households in particularly flood-prone areas. Now, it's not simply a question of just replicating Flood Re in the pandemic context. There are lots and lots of questions to be resolved. And in this piece of work, the goal is to kind of work out what those questions might be with a view to later work kind of unpicking them and kind of trying to provide an answer to them. So specifically, what would be the kind of government and the market appetite for a pandemic scheme? How would pricing work? At the moment in the Flood Re context, we have low-risk homes cross-subsidising high-risk homes. Viruses don't respect that kind of geographical boundary, so that kind of cross-subsidisation question would need to be answered. And also, what might pro-social behaviour look like in the context of pandemic cover? Lots and lots of questions. Another angle, I think, to this piece of work will be to say, well, why did Wimbledon buy cover? Why did no one else buy cover? And I'm going to propose to answer this question from a behavioural perspective. So this will build on previous work where I've used psychological theories of decision-making and behavioural economics to understand how people respond to insurance. And I think at this stage there's probably lots and lots of answers about why Wimbledon bought cover and others didn't. So things like how the purchasing decision was framed, how risk averse different businesses are, how kind of long in the memory do things like the SARS epidemic, foot and mouth, how long do things like that stay in the memory of businesses? How affordable were these policies? Maybe you had a really risk-averse business that simply couldn't afford to pay the premium. So lots and lots of questions to answer, which I think is the basis for hopefully a really exciting period of research and work. And it's really, really great to be doing something at the time of Corona that is topical and hopefully useful going forward.